So, welcome all to the June Artist Talk for Prima Materia with artists Catherine Friend, Star- Tara Stallworth Lee, I messed up your name, and Sophie McVicker. We're so thrilled to be here with you all today. Um, I'm not going to do an introduction or anything. I'm going to share my screen and turn it over to Catherine Friend to get started. She's going to be the first artist that talks today. Bear with me just a moment while I pull that up. And all right, Catherine, go ahead and jump right in.
Okay. Well, first, I want to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed being in the show at Ground Floor Contemporary with Sophie McVickers and Tara Stallworth Lee. We've had a wonderful time. And many months ago, when we found out that we would be in the June show, we quickly met with Jennifer Marshall, as you know, our gallery manager, and pondered over a theme that would unite our work, but it would also give us individual creative space. And Sophie was the brains behind our title, Prima Materia. And we jumped on it. We loved it immediately. And when creating for me, I may have the idea in my head, but it is usually connected to something I have seen or experienced. And in this case, I had an immediate sort of creative flash. And it was being on a footpath bridge and looking down into this rippling water from a pond where small fish were going about their day. And for whatever reason, that just connected me to the title, Prima Materia. And I think when you see seawater from a distance, I don't know how many of you have tried to recreate it, but it all looks pretty much the same color. And it's very difficult to paint for me, certainly in a satisfying way. But when I saw this water up close, I just had this experience. It had thousands of colors, every hue, uh, depth, motion. And so this is what I tried to capture in these three paintings: depth, color, and a sense of movement. And in going with the title, all of this just reminded me of that old sort of word and a phrase too, the primordial swirl, that reminds me of our earliest beginnings. And I'll have to say that's what I tried to capture. And I had this pointed out to me, and I think I knew it, but maybe not in a very conscious way, that these paintings combine the abstract with the figurative, and to and that's what I think created the essence of Prima Materia. And I do think a painting or paintings can teach you something. You're so immersed in the process that I think sometimes you don't realize all that's going on behind it. Certainly, that's the case for me. But I realized this way of combining the abstract and the figurative is something I want to do more in the future. I want to explore this avenue, and I can't wait to see where it takes me. And I stumbled across a quote from one of my favorite theologians, Thomas Merton, and it is: art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. And all of this is kind of where I am, where I am right now. And I am extremely grateful to Ground Floor, Sarah Armstrong, Jennifer Marshall, and all my friend artists for giving me this experience. And Jennifer, that is sort of my short but brief take.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yes.
You ready to jump in, Tara?
I'm never ready, but oh wow, that's a great picture. Now I'm ready. That's great. Thank you. That helps me a lot. Um, I'm going to try it a little differently this time. I have my notes beside me on my phone, and then I have how I condensed that in my head during a run this morning to try to be concise. But Catherine, I loved hearing you talk, and I'm so happy that you went first, because that's a sentiment that I share. Is this show was a really great journey for me in ways that I couldn't have imagined, and I'm so grateful for. Just like you said, just the idea of prima materia, I knew just enough to it's that little nugget, that taste of something good and you want more. I love the idea of what that's about, but I really have never delved into that whole concept and idea. And I was so excited the more I just Google things, and you go down that rabbit hole of connections and how you can relate to ideas. And I realized that I've been working on so many things that connected, and I had never seen that before. And so this is the outcome really of a thought process. It's about a lot of vulnerability and trying new things through process. It's about embracing old ideas. It's about failing, but trying to, I think, ultimately connect myself in a way that's uncomfortable, so that I can better relate to another's experience. I think there's a real beauty in the ugly. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. But I also like efficiency and how can I be my best human self at every point in every day. Oh, I'm so glad you got that too. That was on my to-do list to share, but I didn't have the guts. So yeah, it's I lost my train of thought. These are great, thank you. It's about so many things for me. So I think what I'll do is start from left to right, because I kind of started with all of these parts and a million different thoughts about each one. And so how do I express, visually, how do I convey to all of you here, how do I put it into a narrative that makes any sense at all? But I felt so strongly that these two pieces had to be together. And it wasn't until after and gathering ideas from fellow artists like Renee, thank you, she's in the next room. She was a really big influence over how I thought about this whole little installation. So I thought about, how do I fit it within, I've got the theme, I've got these two wonderful artists I'm showing with, but I have these ideas on how I want to present, and do I impose my own thoughts and ideas without that confidence? And so this is trying these two pieces together, not really knowing why, but after I thought about it, it's just so perfect, because the angel tree, or the angel oak, is represented in a photograph on the left. I took that years ago, not knowing anything about the angel oak, just visiting a friend near Charleston. And folklore talks about enslaved people's souls dancing around this tree as angelic souls. This is one of the oldest living things in our country. This tree is, no one knows how old this tree is, but it's really old and it's magnificent and majestic. And so I love that it's looking upwards towards the heavens. And then on the right, you have a chair, which a lot of people associate empty chairs with death. But I studied psychology, and I loved the relationship between Gestalt cognitive therapy and I collect chairs. I've done it my whole, adult life. And I love the idea of sitting across from an empty chair, and who's in that chair? You have a conversation with a part of yourself. You have a conversation with someone who's different than you are. And I like that idea to kind of get out of your own head and explore, it's a mystical sort of thing in a way, which goes back to this whole idea of prima materia and humanness and connectedness through this tree. And, the idea of dialogue with a part of yourself or someone else. And so then that to me is cohesive in and of itself. But then you have someone like John Lewis in the next piece. Thank you. And his relationship to all of this. It's obvious there's so much heavy stuff to talk about. And see, because I don't have my notes, I'm like totally derailed. I meant to say way earlier that the efficiency of working and thinking about ideas, the Black Cherry project that's happening right now, the artists are submitting proposals. I really want to plug that project because I've been thinking about my own concept for this project, and it's gotten my head and into some of these ideas of terror, but also what I've always done. How do I connect to someone? You know, if I can't do it through race or gender, I look at John Lewis as a fellow Alabamian. He's from the Black Belt. I'm from the Black Belt. This is titled The Boy from Troy. And there's this great StoryCorps interview of John Lewis talking to a friend about riding blindly to Martin Luther King and getting to meet with him. And Martin Luther King, you know, he referred to John Lewis as, you know, you're the boy from Troy. And it's just, I don't know, it's this thing that somehow connects me to who this person was just through place, but also youth. And I'm obsessed with his youthful bravery. And he represents to me this really delicate balance of how to be self-respecting, but also nonviolent and passive, but so strong. He embodies so much of what any human, how far a human can ascend in so many ways. And he was so young at the same time. And that's remarkable to me in the face of everything that was going on at the time. Gosh, there's so much else I could say, but I'm trying to be concise. So if we move to the next piece, it's really, I love thinking about the first image that you shared, Jennifer, and then ending on this because it's really full circle. So, and thank you. Wow. So in thinking about Prima Materia, the piece in the window, okay, here I go. The piece in the window is titled Bull in the Heather. I relate that phrase. It's really about so many other things, probably. It's a Sonic Youth song that I was obsessed with a band, Sonic Youth, in my late teens and 20s. But that was never the person that I was. You know, I'm not overt in certain ways, and I like the idea of passive rebellion. It's a quiet rebellion, and I relate that to John Lewis. It's effective in so many ways. So in a way, I'm asserting my own thoughts. I'm imposing my own thoughts, but in a way that's maybe more subtle. And it's a way to encourage thoughtfulness and listening as opposed to interjecting opinions. And you never have to agree with anyone. That's, you know, it's really about that sitting in the chair and just listening. And so, of course, the materials in the piece in the window, they're walnut, they're rust, they're old sheets and linens. There's so many associations in this piece, but they succumbed to rain. They were in the latest tornadoes in Roebuck. When does something become not useful? When does it become trash? But it can also transition into something beautiful. And it's really this full circle of the elements taking back and nourishing new growth and new ideas, which takes us back to me. It takes me back to the angel oak, and it all becomes this fluid, really beautiful thing. And I want to, gosh, there's so much I didn't say, but there's so much I did say, but I kind of all over the place. But I think ultimately, this whole thing, Sophie, I'm so glad you that we worked with this topic because I thought so much about Gestalt. That's the one thing I learned with my psychology degree. I think is I was so taken with Gestalt psychology, the theory of, what is it? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's like you can have all the data, you can have all the facts and information and add it all up, but there's still something greater. And it's that piece, that mystical piece, I think that I'm talking about in all of this. And there you go. Thank you. Like this was another way to practice something and really think about my own work in a way that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. I really love doing this show. Thank you guys for letting me do this with you.
Okay, Sophie is gonna share her screen.
All right, let's see. Share screen. Okay. Hello, I'm Sophie McVicker. As you guys know, I want to start by saying thank you to everyone at Ground Floor Contemporary for hosting me as a guest artist and allowing me to come into the space and be part of this group and to learn from everyone that I got to work with. It's really been incredible, and I feel like this is really sort of like the beginning of something big and new for me as far as my career goes. So I do watercolor paintings. I also have a background in chemistry. I'm going to kind of give a little broad overview of myself here. So I do intimate and large scale watercolor paintings, oftentimes drawing from inspiration from naturalist illustrators such as Audubon or Edward Lear. So because of that interest in naturalist history really started at a young age. I kept a lot of field notebooks of just drawings of leaves or whatever I could find that would sit still for me. So mostly plants, and occasionally I would attempt animals, less successfully than plants because they move so quickly. And as a kid, I also had a deep interest in alchemy, which is honestly where I got my enthusiasm for chemistry and then went on to get a degree in it. And one thing that I always loved about alchemy was just the rich symbolism and the fact that you could look at illustrations from these ancient manuscripts and have no idea what it means and start to unpack it. And it was just so rich for such simple images that were so rich in meaning. And another thing that influences my work is that I was exposed to a lot of specifically Catholic imagery in my education. And I had always been very, very drawn to the halo and the use of gold, that idea of denoting something as saintly or holy. And that is something that's definitely stayed with me and I utilize a lot in my work. And this is some older work that I've made elsewhere, but very overt with the elaborate gold halo, using gold foil or gold acrylic. So the works in general are always coming from a source of those past influences that I continue to investigate now. And they often come through walking. Meditation is really big for me. I read a lot now, especially that I graduated from school a year ago. I read lots of different things, fiction, poetry, psychology, theology. So I really connect to what both Catherine and Tara said, bringing up the theologian quote, and then Tara talking about your background in psychology, which is something I've sort of started to investigate myself. And stream of consciousness writing is really huge for me. So a lot of this comes from a place of verbal communication that I then start to distill into images. So Prima Materia was something that I have interpreted in sort of the more traditional alchemical sense, just with that interest in alchemy. And at a very literal translation, it translates as the primal element. It's a point of infinite potential, like the egg. It's all of this. It's the beginning. It's, you know, that if you were to talk about the Big Bang, it's what scientists would talk about as the point right before, you know, this place of infinite potential. It's reality before it's been fractionated into all of its parts. So for me, Prima Materia is this constant push and pull between chaos and order, which I think really nests nicely with my own influences with alchemy, religion, and naturalist history. I paint the animals with a lot of attention to detail. I try to have the same rigor that, you know, naturalist historians would have wanted to have in their illustrations, because you're trying to communicate the facts about this animal to the observer. But then I place these animals in a sort of, it's something like reality, but it's not reality. We can see pieces that remind us of what we might find in the real world, but it's all sort of been sublimated. It is melting away. It is constantly shifting. It's chaos. And so that's where I try to come with all of these ideas. And I would say that, you know, again, coming back to psychology, that my interpretation of Prima Materia has, you know, sort of stumbled into a Jungian perspective. You know, he studied alchemy too from a psychological context. And so the work has really, this work for me is really about interiority, and it's a sort of psychological investigation of that push and pull between chaos and order. So now to talk about the pieces in specific. Ooh, I had that set up. So the first two pieces that I want to talk about are Ubi Sunt 1 and 2. So all the pieces were named in Latin. I studied Latin in middle school and don't know much of it, but have always been very passionate about it. And I love any Catholic mass that uses some actual Latin instead of just the English. I think it's very meaningful. And so Ubi Sunt is a sort of rhetorical question that has been very popular in poetry, and it directly means where are, but in most contexts we understand it as where are they? And it's meant to lament the passage of time, death, loss, and changes. And so it seemed appropriate that both these pieces, this one of a California condor, and then this one of the Andean condor, would reflect this, as these are both, you know, very prehistoric appearing birds that are endangered. And so it's sort of lamenting this passage of time that has befallen these great creatures. So the next one is Quere, which means to seek or to inquire. And one inspiration for this piece is sort of Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey, which is, you know, manifest in lots and lots and lots of excellent mythologies and stories across time. And so the idea is you voluntarily seek to find something. And this means leaving the safe haven of the home and voluntarily voyaging out into the unknown to, you know, find enlightenment, to transcend, or to bring it back to Jung, to, you know, discover the shadow self and to grapple with that. And so we have this European hare that's bounding along with this looming bull snake sort of starting to envelop it. The next piece, has the longest title. This is Timor Mortis Contrabat Me. So what that means is the fear of death disturbs me. And it's a responsory in liturgies, in nocturne matins, which would be nightly prayers. And so there's a whole string that would be said in Latin. And part of it that really captured me was the fear of death disturbs me. And it makes sense that this would capture me because it actually later became a whole genre of poetry in Scotland, which I found out doing a little extra research. And so it's the idea that there is real peril in voluntarily choosing to go on such a quest. And just because you make the choice doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and that there is a real danger psychologically and physically sometimes when you decide to venture into the unknown. So the last piece is temet nosce, which means know thyself. And this is part of what is inscribed at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. So there are 3 maxims: know thyself, surety brings ruin, and nothing in excess. And I must say that the other 2 are very provocative for me in meaning, and I'm sure I'm going to make 2 other pieces to reflect these maxims. But I'm going to, be kind of vague about what exactly is going on in the image, because if I'm being honest, it's still something I'm unpacking, which makes it so exciting to create. But I knew that this piece needed to talk about knowing yourself truly and honestly. So the last thing I'm going to talk about briefly is the, here's some extra details. The last thing I want to talk about briefly is the framing of the pieces. So something that's become really important to me in the past year and a half is building my own frames for the pieces. And I think a lot of this stems from the desire of just wanting to have control over it, and knowing that I want the frames to serve as effective transitions between the world of the painting and what the viewer sees. I think that the frame needs to be more than just utilitarian. It needs to be more than just a way to protect the piece. It needs to speak to the piece, talk about the piece. It needs to amplify it rather than try and confine it in this box. And so that's the reason why I build my own frames, and I feel incredibly passionate about doing it. And I want it to start to, be a portal into the world of the painting that I, as the artist, have had control over. So that's it. Thank you for letting me speak and listening. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Well, thanks to all 3 of you. That was really great. We'll open it up for questions now. If there's anybody that has a question for any of these 3 artists, feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in. And if anybody doesn't do that right now, then I will ask, let's see, Sophie, I wonder if you'd talk a little bit more about actually building the frames too.
Yeah.
I think that that's a great element, because honestly, you go and purchase a frame from somewhere else. It's something that's completely different from the object that you've just made. You're basically containing it within the commercially produced thing. And Tara's partner builds her frames for her, and she's involved in that process too. And it's a very special thing that they do. The wood is selected. And so that's an element of your work and Tara's that I think I'm very attracted to. I'm wondering if you just tell us how long you've been doing it, break down the process for us, things like that.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab a small one just to point to. This one's empty and it's super simple. I think this is actually one of the first ones that I built. Actually it is. There were 3 of them and I've kept the last one. So with the frame, it consists of, this frame itself, we call these pieces here molding. And I'm saying that for me more than anyone else, because when I first started frame building, I had no idea what anything was called. And I just got on YouTube and I was like, how to build a frame. So I like to also make the distinction, and I should have said it earlier, that I make my own molding. When you see some of these really richly ornate carved molded frames, that's coming, that molding is coming from the manufacturer, which is an option you can use to buy that and then assemble it into a frame. And so I think it's one of those things where it really started out of necessity, because it's really hard to find frames that show natural wood grain. And that was something I really wanted, because they're either solid black, they're solid white, or they're gilded with gold. And I just wanted brown frames with wood grain. And so for me, I build all of my frames with poplar, which is a soft wood, really, because my initial goal with frame building was to also include hand carving. And I have a stack of probably 8 hand carved frames that I've yet to finish. And poplar was sturdy enough to be built into a frame, and it was inexpensive enough, and it carves well. So that is something I've really committed to, is using poplar. There's a ton of flexibility when it comes to, you can keep it light, or you could stain it to look like a dark wood as well. And I think for me, the frame is just, it's a way to exercise. Let me backtrack. When I was in school, I was getting a degree in chemistry and in art simultaneously. And a lot of people asked me how I did it. And I was like, well, when I get tired of creating or the art, I can switch over to chemistry and be very analytical, and vice versa. And since I've graduated and not had chemistry, the frame building has really started to serve that role, in which when I get tired and exhausted of the painting process, it's a way that I can continue to create and work towards the same goal, but to sort of use a different side of my brain to do that. I think that's about it. I mean, the last big thing for me is that it's also opened a fascination with joinery. I try to use no hardware on the frame except for what needs to lock the glass in place and to hang it on the wall. But that's been really fun. It's just another community to be a part of and to learn from.
Tara, why don't you talk a little bit about your frames too?
Sure. I'm so glad you brought it up, because those were in my notes, but I never referenced that. And I'm so glad you talked, because it's another way to relate to you, Sophie, as a framer. I mean, because it is its own thing for sure. I can relate to, I want my hands in everything that I do and that I present. And gosh, there's so much to it. Honestly, I hate waste of any kind. And I primarily use heart pine, because I have a stash from a building that used to exist where I'm from. There's a history with my parents being little, going to a birthday party there together, and I mean, well before they started dating. And there are so many memories that exist within the lives of people that I know associated with this building, where being from South Alabama, so many people and the families are involved in the timber industry, which was so much of my shame growing up, that we strip forests and then they're replanted and they grow really fast, and then we strip them again. And so I grew up around that, and having seen Bambi in the movie theater, and I think I was 6 years old, the idea of the animals just running for their life, and finding new homes, I just lived with that forever. So this is really a lot of what's happening with my frames. It's this wood has this heart pine, it's slow growth, and that's a healthy, lovely, beautiful forest that used to exist that doesn't anymore. It's not, the forests I know now are not the same. And so it's sort of we're still refining our frames. I think they're still very clunky. The molding, we've got a lot of molding made. So we're using up the molding, because I hate waste. I don't want to waste any part of this tree that I don't have to. And I want to somehow preserve. It gets back into what's trash, what's useful, I'm not contributing to frames that are being mailed from across the seas and all that that entails. I get so nuanced in my head with everything. I could talk for hours about frames and how important they are. Sophie, you said you made so many points, and you said it so well. You articulated so much that I think about a lot with frames. And we've got a lot of refining to do, but it's the process, like just like art making, it's another form of creative energy that I really enjoy. And I like the material. I love holding it. I like polishing it with a wax, you know, what I use to preserve it. And love on it is another form of, it's another natural material. And I enjoy that loving on it every time I show it or have to, you know, clean it. I like spending time with the frames and the wood. So yeah, they're uber important to me. And I actually have some wood burning tools that I've been exploring with a little bit. So yeah, I want my frames to, I want to make different types of frames. We have now cherry and walnut, and you know, they're all sourced from the neighborhood when the tornado came down, and you know, these trees will have new life. So I'm glad we talked about this part.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's an interesting element to your work specifically, because you're going really deep with it. Like Sophie, that's like another level for you, is like where you source your wood from, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
That's great. Well, what about a question for Catherine? Does anybody have anything?
And Jennifer,
Yeah.
I'd love to just keep going a little bit with the framing ideas before we move on. First of all, I'm in awe of both Sophie and Tara's gorgeous frames. I think for the longest time, I've wanted to take my work further by framing my own pieces. And I've talked to Patty B. Driscoll probably too many times about framing, because she's another one of our members who has explored that just in a beautiful way. But anyway, I think that a fun thing to consider for ground floor could be a framing class. And it could be a simple one, but something taught by some of our members just to get people started. And anyway, I think everybody needs to see these frames on these pieces because they really are amazing. So those are my comments.
That was nice, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you worked, talk a little bit how you work, typically the last piece that you had in the show with, that was curated by Tanner was a lot more representational.
Right.
And I think that the other pieces, well, the last show you did prior to that, I think that they were very abstract. So I'm curious to hear just a brief kind of outline of how you operate as an artist within those two genres.
Well, I think that every day I feel split in two, I would say. I am pulled to the representational, and I think when I started really painting 20 years ago, I was taking classes, and nobody teaches abstract, at least that I could find, maybe in a school setting, but I was taking from representational types of artists who were wonderful, but I just went along that route for quite some time, but I'm always attracted to more abstraction. And I think that it hasn't been a bad thing, because I think I am hopefully honing my skills technically with materials and drawing and all those things that I consider a part of the representational. But I would bet if I had 20 more years to see where I would be, I bet it would be in a purely abstract place, because it's more satisfying. It's freer. as far as how I feel when I'm painting and the materials you can use. It is just exciting. You can use almost anything in your kitchen. You can use anything, it's just seems to be, I feel much more creative when I do abstract work. But I am still painting with old friends who paint in a representational way. And a lot of that is I wouldn't give up my painting days with them, because there's such a creative side to that too. So I think that's where I would say it's one of my struggles.
I have a question for Catherine. Since I don't paint, I'm curious about the order and how you work as far as they're hung in a way, left to right. Did you paint them that way? First, second, third? Do you want them to all be seen almost as one piece, an abstract piece? How do you think about the order as you're working in 3 separate parts?
All right, I think that, well, I know the one on the right was the first, the one in the middle, second, and the one on the left, the third. And the one on the right, to me, feels as if it has more depth because I think one thing, the green tones, I don't know how many layers that painting has, but I kept going over and over, and I would have a piece of it I really liked. So then I would leave that and then add another layer. And that one I would think would have been the most satisfying. That was the freest. That was the one where I entered the most into the unknown as far as what it was going to be like. And anyway, as far as a whole body of work, yes, I wanted it to look, but I wasn't trying to match them up, or I don't know that I necessarily think they would ever all hang together, but I like that they, to me, feel as if there's a storyline there and that they flow. So that's kind of it. They were fun to do.
Catherine, I love those. And I love the way you're going for abstraction and
Hey.
figurative work. It's beautiful. I think you've nailed it. And
Thank you.
So excited.
Well, your work.
Sophie, I'm in on the frame gig. I can't wait to see your pieces. Sophie, I can't believe you carve it. That's so cool.
I didn't carve these. I should make that. I didn't carve the frames that are in the gallery. I should make that distinction. I use power tools to get those.
Are they right by you, the ones that you've carved?
If you give me 1 second, I'll fetch one.
I'm so curious.
She does have like a little bit of detail though on them. It looks like she built a small section and like glued it on the corners to give it some depth.
So I've got
Patty, I was going to tell you, when you look closely at Sophie's frames, instead of doing the expected and taking the whole like molding piece all the way around, she did just portions of it.
Love that.
And I love that, when you really look at it.
So I brought, this one hasn't been sanded because I hate hand sanding all of this.
Wow.
But there's some of that. And then I finished one, which I have, and I don't know how well it's going to turn out because it's again stained black with the lacquer and it has a painting in it, but I'll try and show you.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
They are
Thank
gorgeous.
you.
It really is.
It's really low relief. I think if I made 8 of these, if I were making more, I might get I need to get a bandsaw and have segments of wood that I carve and then glue those onto the frame and then carve in and around and stuff like that. So it's more high relief because I think that's something that I with specifically investigating with this framing series that I did for Prima Materia was just having something that has more of that depth and drama just from the sheer, you know, thickness and how I can make it seem bigger than it is.
Yeah.
Because boy, wood is expensive. I'm not as living in the city and not going out into, you know, the wilderness like Tara is so brave. And to, you know, find my own wood, you know, I'm going to like local, just like, oh, here's poplar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
But it still connects you with wood. And so now you've got this new, you know, adventure with wood.
Yeah.
Who
And
knows
it's
where it's gonna
sometimes
go.
incredibly frustrating. And there's, you know, me calling my mom and venting to her because I'm like, I hate this. I hate doing this, but I'm going to keep doing it.
Yes.
But it's very
Yes.
rewarding.
Very. Yeah.
The
It
show
feels
looks
right.
great.
Oh.
Exciting.
Well, we can wrap unless there's any other comments or questions. We've gone about 45 minutes, so that's our goal. Okay, well, I guess we'll say farewell. Thanks again so much for everybody for coming, and thank you so much to the artists. You've been really wonderful to work with, and it's so rewarding to see your work up and hear you talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for everything.
All right, well, bye everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Congrats.
Bye-bye.